It was supposed to be a simple summer night. 2 kids, a borrowed bike, and a gravel road that cut through the heart of Texas hill country. But when the sun rose on June 9th, 1973, Michael and Claire Danner were gone. Their disappearance shattered Coldwater, a town that prided itself on peace. 2 siblings vanished. Their father was arrested. For 50 years, the truth settled beneath the creekbed. What really happened on that road? And why did everyone stop asking? If stories like this keep you up at night, hit subscribe and stay with us. The air that night tasted like rain that would never fall. June 8th, 1973. Coldwater, Texas. A dry wind moved through the mesquite and telephone poles, rattling the wires like thin bones. At the edge of town, where the asphalt ended and dirt began, the Danner house sat alone, its porch light a trembling halo in the dark. Inside, Claire Danner, age 10, sat cross-legged on the floor, tracing a constellation map with a dull pencil. Her brother, Michael, 13, leaned against the window, watching lightning flare miles away. Their father, Roy Danner, was asleep in his chair, a half-drained beer sweating onto the carpet. Their mother, Helen, hadn't come home yet. She'd said she was working late at the diner, though most nights she came home smelling like gasoline and distance. By 9:30, the house was quiet except for the ticking of the kitchen clock. Michael stood, slipped on his sneakers. "Come on," he whispered. "Let's go watch the storm from the ridge." Claire hesitated. "Dad'll be mad. He's out cold." She folded her star map and followed him out. The screen door groaned, then clapped shut behind them. Outside, the night was thick and hot. Cicadas screamed from the brush. The road glowed faintly under the moon, stretching out toward the dry creek bed beyond the cotton fields. They took the old bicycle, Michael pedaling, Claire holding tight to the seat. Dust rose behind their wheels, a pale ghost twisting through the dark. At 9:47 p.m., a truck passed them heading the opposite way. Old, dark blue. No plates. The driver's face hidden by glare. At 9:52, a neighbor named Etta Klein heard a scream carried by the wind. High, short, and cut off. She told police later she thought it was a bobcat. By dawn, the Danner children were gone. The sheriff's men found the bicycle near the dry creek, tires half buried in mud. No blood, no tracks, no sign of struggle. By the second day, search parties combed the fields. Helicopters swept over Coldwater. Reporters arrived, their vans kicking up dust on Main Street. On the third night, Roy Danner was arrested for murder. The town watched as he was led down the courthouse steps, eyes empty, shirt torn open at the collar. He said nothing. He never did again. For 50 years, Coldwater called it a tragedy, a curse, a closed book. Until the drought came back, and the creek that swallowed the past began to dry again. And what it gave up wasn't just bones. It was a story everyone had tried to bury. June 2023. Coldwater, Texas. The drought had been gnawing at the land for months. Even the flies seemed slower, their wings thick with dust. On the outskirts of town, where the dry creek cut through limestone and mesquite, a yellow backhoe sat idle under the heat. A county work crew had been clearing debris from the exposed riverbed when the foreman's shovel hit something hard and hollow. At first, they thought it was driftwood. Then one of the younger men saw the shape. Curved, pale, unmistakable. By noon, the site was sealed. Detective Evelyn Shaw stepped out of her unmarked SUV, the soles of her boots sinking into cracked mud. The heat pressed down on her shoulders, heavy as guilt. She'd driven in from Austin after the call came in. Possible remains found near the old Danner property. Coldwater, a town she hadn't visited in 20 years, not since her internship with the county sheriff's office. Even then, people whispered about the Danner case like it was a ghost story. She ducked under the yellow tape. The foreman nodded toward a shallow pit. "That's where we hit it." "We didn't move nothing," Evelyn crouched. The bones were small, child-sized, curled inward, almost fetal. Nearby lay the twisted remnants of a metal buckle, half-eaten by rust. "Bag everything," she said quietly, "and get me a perimeter check, 20 meters in each direction." Her partner, forensic tech Luis Ortega, glanced up from his camera. "You thinking this is the Danner kids?" Evelyn didn't answer. Beyond the creek, the town shimmered in the heat. A handful of roofs. The faded sign for Ruby's Cafe, a church steeple leaning slightly east. Time hadn't just passed here. It had settled, like dust in old lungs. By mid-afternoon, reporters began gathering at the fence line. Evelyn watched them through the glare. Familiar faces, bright microphones, hungry eyes. History always drew them, especially the kind soaked in rumor. At 3:20 p.m., the coroner arrived. The remains were lifted carefully, wrapped, labeled. Evelyn followed each movement like a metronome. Procedure was safety. It kept emotion at bay. But when Ortega brushed away another layer of silt, she saw it. A small silver pendant, oval, engraved faintly with 2 letters, C.D. Claire Danner. The world seemed to slow, the hum of cicadas dissolving into silence. Evelyn stared at the pendant glinting in the sun, decades of legend condensing into one undeniable fact. "They're going to reopen it," Ortega murmured. "They'll have to," she said. By sunset, news of the discovery was already spreading. Coldwater's main street came alive with speculation. Old men outside the barber shop remembered the arrest. Younger ones had only heard stories. How Roy Danner swore he was innocent. How he'd hung himself in his cell 3 months later. Now the creek had spoken, and the town didn't know how to listen. Evelyn drove back to her motel, the same one the reporters had taken over. The sign flickered above the lot. Sunset Inn. Vacancy. Inside, the air smelled faintly of mildew and old cigarettes. She dropped her badge on the table, opened her laptop, and pulled up the archived case file. The photographs were grainy, scanned from old Polaroids. 2 smiling children, a red bicycle, a house now swallowed by weeds. Then a booking photo, Roy Danner, 42, jaw square, eyes hollow. Typed beneath, confessed to murder, recanted. Case closed, 1974. She leaned back, rubbing her temples. The creek had given back bones, but not clarity. The next morning, Evelyn met with Sheriff Nolan Hayes, who'd been a rookie in the 70s and now wore the years like armor. "They'll dig up the past whether we want them to or not," he said, staring at the case photos spread across his desk. "You sure you want to reopen this mess?" "It's not a choice," Evelyn said. "If that pendant belongs to Claire Danner, the past just reopened itself." He sighed. "You know what that means. Reporters, lawsuits, people remembering things they swore they forgot good," she said. Hayes gave a slow, humorless smile. "You sound like your old man. He worked this case, you know." Before it got taken away, Evelyn froze. "Taken away?" "State came in," said the sheriff. "Botched it. Evidence got lost. Files went missing. Same story as always." She looked down at the photos again. The children frozen in sunlight, smiling for a world that forgot them. That evening, she drove out to the edge of town. The Danner property was still there, what little was left of it. The house had collapsed years ago, leaving a skeleton of wood and rusted tin. The sun bled out over the horizon, staining everything red. Evelyn stood at the fence line, dust curling around her boots. She could almost hear laughter carried on the wind, the echo of 2 voices pedaling into the dark. The creek had started to give back its secrets, and Coldwater was about to remember what forgetting had cost. Morning light bled over Coldwater like a slow bruise. The sun rose pale through the dust, catching the rusted windmill blades on the edge of town. Detective Evelyn Shaw parked outside the diner that had once been Helen Danner's workplace. Ruby's Cafe. The same chipped red sign still swung above the door. Inside, the air smelled of coffee and memory. An old man sat in the corner booth, facing the window, his hat resting beside a folded newspaper. Sheriff Hayes had called ahead, said he'd been there in '73, a field hand named Walter Dray, the last man to see the Danner kids alive. Evelyn slid into the seat across from him. He looked up, eyes pale blue and watery, like sky seen through smoke. "You the detective?" he asked. "Yes, sir." Evelyn Shaw. He nodded slowly, fingers tracing the rim of his coffee cup. "I figured they'd send someone when the creek gave 'em up. Been waiting 50 years to tell it, right? What do you remember about that night?" Walter's hands trembled slightly as he spoke. "June 8th. Hotter than the devil's breath. I was driving home from the feedlot, rode out past their house. Saw those two kids on a bicycle. Boy up front, girl hanging on tight." They waved. "You said that before, back in '73. Evelyn said gently. "Yeah." He hesitated, but I didn't say what I saw after. Evelyn leaned forward. "There was a truck," he continued. "Old Ford, dark blue, pulled out behind me near the bend. Didn't think much then, but when I looked in the rear view, that bike was lying in the road. Nobody around. Did you report it?" "I tried." Sheriff said I was mistaken. Said I'd had too many long shifts in the sun. Told me to forget it. Evelyn's jaw tightened. "Who was sheriff then?" He gave a weary smile. "Same one you're working for now. Nolan Hayes. Only he wasn't wearing the badge yet. He was deputy under Sheriff Lyle Cotter. They buried that whole thing deep. The waitress brought fresh coffee, pretending not to listen. But Evelyn could feel the hush that had settled across the cafe, like the room itself was holding its breath." Walter went on. "Few nights later, I drove that same road again. There was a smell, sweet, like gasoline and something rotten. Creek was running then, before the droughts. I saw light down there, thought it was a campfire, heard someone crying." He paused, eyes distant. "Next morning, the search started, and that smell was gone." Evelyn studied him. "Why come forward now?" He met her gaze, voice low. "Because I'm dying, and lies rot worse than bodies." Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the diner windows. Evelyn closed her notebook and rose. "I'll need to take a statement," she said. He nodded, sliding an envelope across the table. "Already written." Been sitting on it half a lifetime, she took it carefully. Inside, folded paper yellowed with age. One line stood out even before she read it. Old Ford, dark blue. County seal on the door. Same bend where the bike lay. County-owned meant government-issued, which meant whoever took those children wasn't just a neighbor. They were someone with authority. Evelyn stepped outside into the heat. The morning sun glared off the pavement, blinding. She stood still for a moment, the town humming faintly around her, the slow rhythm of denial that had lasted decades. When she reached her car, Hayes was waiting beside it, arms crossed. "Dre's spinning ghost stories again?" he asked. "He saw a county vehicle at the scene," Evelyn said. Hayes's expression didn't flicker. "He also swore his dead wife spoke to him in a dream last week. His details line up with the old photos. The creek, the bend, the timing." Hayes raised a hand. "You're digging up old dirt, Shaw. This town's held together by what it forgets." "Maybe that's the problem," she said quietly. He studied her for a long moment, then stepped closer. "You think your father didn't ask the same questions?" "He did. Nearly lost his badge over it. Maybe you ought to let ghosts lie." She held his gaze. "Ghosts don't stay buried forever." By the time she reached the station, the envelope from Walter Dray sat open on the passenger seat. His handwriting was shaky but legible. Beneath the note about the truck, another line read, "Driver wore a badge. Not sheriff. The other kind. County Works Department." She logged into the county archives, pulling up records from 1973. It took nearly an hour to find it. Coldwater County Public Works, Vehicle Registry. 2 trucks matching that description were active that summer. One belonged to Ray Timmons, the town road supervisor, the other to Roy Danner. Her pulse thudded. Roy Danner, the father. But if he'd been driving the truck, why were there 2 sets of tire marks found near the creek? The screen flickered in the dim office light. She leaned closer. A 3rd line of handwriting in the margin caught her eye. Truck number 6, reassigned July 1973. No reason given. Transferred to state storage. Waverly Depot storage meant records, maintenance, maybe even trace evidence if the vehicle hadn't been scrapped. Evelyn closed the file, grabbed her keys. The truth was starting to breathe again, and Coldwater's silence was about to break its teeth. The road to Waverly Depot ran straight through nothing. 50 miles of heat, dust, and skeletal fence posts stretching toward the horizon. Evelyn Shaw drove with the windows cracked, the smell of sun-baked asphalt flooding the car. The depot sat at the edge of an abandoned airfield, 3 long hangars of corrugated metal, faded signs peeling from their sides. A government facility once, then county storage, now a graveyard for forgotten machines. A man in a canvas hat met her at the gate. His name tag read, G. Rowland, Maintenance. "You the detective?" he asked. "Evelyn Shaw." "I called about a vehicle. Coldwater County Public Works, 1973. He squinted at the clipboard in his hand. "Records say it's still here. Barn 2. South End. Been sitting a long time." Inside, the air was cool and stale. Shafts of sunlight spilled through holes in the roof, catching swirls of dust. Rows of old county trucks lined the walls, each tagged with a faded number. Roland led her halfway down the aisle and stopped beside a rusted blue Ford. Number 6 stenciled on the door, barely visible. The seal of Coldwater County ghosted beneath the flaking paint. Evelyn ran her hand over the fender, feeling the grit. The truck's interior was gutted, upholstery split, dash cracked, floor coated in silt. A small tag still dangled from the rearview mirror. Retired 1974. She crouched beside the door, noticing something half buried beneath the seat. A thin chain, silver, tangled in the springs. She eased it out carefully. A pendant hung from the end, shaped like a tiny heart. Her throat tightened. Potential Danner artifact. Logged without conclusion. Chain of custody initiated. "Find what you were looking for?" Roland asked quietly. "More than I wanted," she murmured. She bagged the chain and called Ortega. "Get me a forensics van out here. Full sweep, print, soil, anything organic, and bring the luminol kit." By the time he arrived, the sky outside had bruised purple. They worked under portable lamps, the hiss of cicadas bleeding through the open hangar door. "Interior's clean," Ortega said. "Too clean." "This thing's been wiped a dozen times," Evelyn nodded. "Try the bed." He sprayed the chemical mist, waited, then flicked off the light. Under ultraviolet glow, faint streaks appeared across the metal, 2 parallel smears, darker at the center. Blood, long degraded but still traceable. Evelyn exhaled slowly. "Get samples to the lab. I want a rush analysis." When they finished, she stood outside the hangar, the air thick with dust and memory. The field around them was silent except for the occasional call of a night bird. She thought of the father, Roy Danner, claiming innocence until the day he died. Of the sheriff's files lost in transfer. Of the creek that had waited half a century to speak. And she thought of her own father, who had once tried to reopen this case, only to be shut down by the same men whose names kept reappearing. The headlights of a passing truck swept across the field, momentarily blinding her. She shielded her eyes, and for a second, she thought she saw a figure standing beyond the fence. Tall, motionless, watching. Then the lights passed, and the figure was gone. "Evelyn?" Ortega's voice broke the quiet. "You all right?" She nodded, though her chest felt tight. "Yeah, Let's lock up on the drive back to town. She played through every detail in her mind. The timeline didn't fit the official story. June 8th, the kids vanish. June 9th, search begins. June 11th, Roy Danner arrested. But truck number 6 wasn't transferred until July. Why move it a month later, unless someone wanted it gone after the fact? She reached the motel close to midnight. Her room smelled of rain that hadn't fallen. The old ceiling fan ticked like a clock running out of time. She spread her notes across the bed, photographs, maps, copies of Walter Dries' statement. At the center she placed the pendant, glinting faintly under lamplight. It was smaller than Claire's star necklace, but similar. Maybe it belonged to another child. Or maybe, she thought darkly, someone wanted it to look that way. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She answered. Detective Shaw. The voice was low, male, slightly hoarse. You're digging where you shouldn't. Who is this? Silence. Then, some things were buried for a reason. The line went dead. Evelyn stared at the phone, heart pounding. Outside, wind scraped against the window, carrying dust like whispered warnings. She turned off the lamp and sat in the dark, listening. The town was asleep. The world was still. But the past was awake now. Morning broke in shades of copper and pale gold, the color of old photographs. Detective Evelyn Shaw sat in her car at the edge of Coldwater Bridge, watching sunlight skim across the dried creek below, the same creek that had started giving up its dead. She'd barely slept. The anonymous call still echoed in her head. Some things were buried for a reason. She'd traced it to a payphone at a gas station outside Waverly. No camera coverage, no prints, just a voice that knew too much. Now she had another lead. Helen Danner, mother of the missing children. She'd vanished not long after her husband's arrest, rumored to have left town under a new name. Sheriff Hayes said she'd remarried up north somewhere, that there was no use stirring her ghosts. Evelyn didn't believe that for a second. She'd followed a paper trail instead. Hospital records, a property transfer, a change of name. Helen Danner became Ellen Caro. Current address, a small trailer outside Junction, Texas. Population 800, and falling. Evelyn pulled up just after 10. The place sat near the river, surrounded by dying willow trees. A stray dog barked once, then wandered off. The woman who answered the door looked older than her 60-odd years. Her hair, once blonde, had gone the color of smoke. She studied Evelyn's badge before speaking. "I knew this day would come," she said quietly. "You look like your father." Evelyn blinked. "You knew him?" "I remember his eyes." Same kind that doesn't stop digging. She stepped aside. "Come in. I made coffee inside. The trailer smelled faintly of pine cleaner and dust." A single fan hummed in the corner. Framed photographs lined a narrow shelf. Landscapes, sunsets, nothing human. Not a single picture of the children. Evelyn sat across from her at the small table. "Mrs. Caro." "Helen's fine," she interrupted. "I gave up pretending years ago." Evelyn nodded. "You know why I'm here." "The creek," Helen said, staring out the window. "It always was cruel. Took things and kept them. We found Claire's pendant," Evelyn said softly, "in an old county truck." Number 6. Helen's hands tightened around her cup. For a long moment, she didn't speak. Then, "I told them it wasn't Roy." Nobody listened. Said a mother always defends her own. "You believe your husband was innocent?" "I know he was." Her eyes shone with something raw, almost desperate. "He was rough, yes. Drank too much. But he loved those kids. He'd never—" She stopped, breath shaking. They wanted it to end. To make it neat, who wanted it to end? The sheriff. The county board, maybe even the state boys. There was pressure. News cameras, big city reporters sniffing around. They needed someone to hang it on. Roy was simple, angry. poor. Easy to blame. Evelyn leaned forward. Did anyone threaten you? Helen hesitated. There was a man came by after Roy's arrest. Said he was from the state attorney's office. Told me to keep quiet about the night of the 8th. Said if I loved my family, I'd move on. Do you remember his name? She looked at her hands. No, but I remember his car. Black sedan. Government plates, Evelyn wrote quickly. Did you see that same car before your children disappeared? Helen's voice went small. Yes, parked near the bridge. Same night they left the house. I thought it was a patrolman. The fan hummed louder, its blades clicking. Outside, wind rippled through dry grass. Evelyn watched Helen's reflection in the window, her face still, her eyes lost somewhere years away. Mrs. Danner, she said softly, why didn't you ever come back? Helen turned toward her. Because the truth wasn't going to save anyone. Roy was dead. My babies were gone. And Coldwater doesn't forgive women who outlive their grief. Evelyn closed her notebook. We're reopening the case. Forensic tests are pending. I'll need you to give a statement. Helen gave a faint, bitter smile. You think I haven't given enough? When Evelyn stood to leave, Helen followed her to the door. You said you found the pendant, she said. That was Claire's. But there should have been two. Michael wore his on a string he made from fishing line. Same shape, smaller. Evelyn paused. Do you know where it might be? Helen shook her head. If you find it, you'll know who handled that truck last. He. But Helen had already closed the door. Back in her car, Evelyn sat for a moment, letting the cicadas fill the silence. Then her phone buzzed. A message from Ortega. Lab result. Blood sample match. DNA confirmed. Michael Danner. Evelyn's breath caught. The blood in the truck bed was his. She started the engine and drove, gravel crunching under the tires. The road back toward Coldwater Bridge shimmered in the heat, the air bending like glass. At the midpoint of the bridge, she stopped. Below, the creek bed wound through pale limestone, a scar across the land. She got out, walked to the railing. The smell of dust and metal hung faintly in the air. Something glinted in the sunlight below. A flash, quick and deliberate, like a mirror signal. Someone was down there. Evelyn drew her gun and started down the embankment, boots sliding in loose gravel. The wind picked up, whispering through dead grass. But when she reached the dry bed, there was no one. Only a small tin box half buried near the bridge support. She knelt and lifted it free, brushing away dirt. Inside were three things. A Polaroid, half faded. A child's fishing line necklace. And a sheriff's badge, corroded almost beyond recognition. Stamped across its surface, Cotter. By the time Evelyn reached the station, the sun had dropped behind the hills, turning the streets of Coldwater a dull rust color. The sheriff's office sat at the corner of Main and Pine, its windows glowing faintly yellow, the flag out front barely stirring in the heat. Inside, the air smelled of old paper and coffee gone stale. Sheriff Hayes sat behind his desk, sleeves rolled to the elbow, phone pressed to his ear. He looked up when she entered. Shaw, he said, covering the receiver. I heard you were in Junction. I found Helen Danner, she said flatly. She's alive. Changed her name. He sighed, setting the phone down. And? She says the case was buried. That your predecessor, Sheriff Cotter, silenced witnesses. Hayes leaned back, folding his hands over his stomach. That old story again. She pulled the evidence bag from her coat and set it on his desk. Inside, the corroded badge caught the light. Recognize it? His expression didn't change, but his fingers stilled. Where'd you get that? Under Coldwater Bridge. Buried with Michael Danner's blood necklace and a photo I haven't stopped thinking about. Hayes exhaled slowly. You're reopening what we were ordered to box. Ghosts don't leave fingerprints, she said. People do. He opened the bag carefully, studying the badge. Cotter disappeared in '74. Packed up, left the state. No forwarding address. Maybe that's your man, or maybe someone wanted us to think that. She slid the Polaroid across the table. It showed two children standing in front of a pickup, squinting in sunlight. Behind them, a shadow. A tall figure in a wide-brimmed hat, half cut off by the frame. Hayes frowned. Where'd this come from? Same box. Same place. He ran a hand down his face. This isn't helping your case, Shaw. If you're saying the sheriff from 50 years ago kidnapped two kids, that's a headline this town doesn't need. She leaned forward, voice low. I'm saying someone used his badge. Someone with authority. That badge wasn't lost. It was left there for a long time. Neither spoke. The wall clock ticked loudly, each second grinding against her patience. Finally, Hayes said, You really think Cotter did it? I think Cotter covered it, she said. And I think whoever called me last night doesn't want the rest uncovered. Hayes looked at her, something unreadable passing across his face. You're chasing ghosts, Shaw. Go home. Write your report. Let the state boys handle the rest. She stared at him. You sound just like them. He stood, walking to the window. You know what happens to people who dig too deep in this county? She waited. They end up forgotten. He turned back, eyes cold. Watch yourself. Evelyn left before she said something she'd regret. Outside, dusk had settled heavy over Main Street. The diner sign flickered in the distance, red neon bleeding into the dark. She walked to her car, hand still trembling slightly. Hayes's warning wasn't concern. It was fear. And fear meant knowledge. She started the engine and drove east, following instinct more than direction. The road curved toward the old mill at the river's edge, a place the locals still avoided after sunset. The county once used it for storage, but rumor said Cotter had run operations there off the record. When she pulled up, the air smelled of wet earth and oil. The structure loomed above the water, its roof half collapsed, windows broken like blind eyes. She grabbed her flashlight and stepped inside. The beam cut through the darkness, catching motes of dust and the glint of rusted machinery. Water dripped rhythmically from a broken pipe, echoing off the concrete. Near the back, she found a series of old file cabinets, most empty, but one locked. She wedged the drawer open with her knife. Inside lay a stack of folders bound with string. Her flashlight trembled as she read the first label. CD case file, Danner, 1973. Confidential. Her pulse hammered. She flipped it open. Inside were photographs she'd never seen. Crime scene prints of the Danner home. One showed a child's bedroom, the sheets still turned down. Another, a muddy footprint near the back door. The pattern was distinct, half boot, half tread. She pulled another photo, this one of the old Ford truck. On the back, written in faded pencil, relocated to storage per HC. Harold Cotter. She sank onto a crate, breathing hard. Every line of the report contradicted the official version. The search pattern was falsified, the timestamps altered. At the bottom of the folder, a note in a different hand. Bodies not recovered. Keep contained. Pending confirmation from County Engineer. The name hit her like a stone. Helen had mentioned a black sedan, government plates. A second note stapled behind it read, Meeting scheduled, July 3, 1973, Rivermill office. Attendees, H. Cotter, R. Danner, L. Marston. Evelyn froze. Leon Marston, Coldwater's current mayor. Her flashlight flickered once, then went dark. Somewhere behind her, a floorboard creaked. She turned sharply, hand on her gun. The silence that followed was total, suffocating. She backed toward the door, keeping the beam aimed forward. Then came another sound. Metal sliding against metal. The file cabinet drawer she'd opened was closing itself. Her breath caught. A shadow moved near the entrance, brief, human, then gone. Who's there? No answer. only the slow whisper of wind through broken glass. She grabbed the files, stuffed them into her bag, and bolted outside. The rain had begun to fall, light at first, then harder, hammering the roof like static. She jumped into the car and started it, tires spinning on wet gravel. As she pulled onto the main road, headlights flared behind her, too bright, too close. She pressed the accelerator. The car followed, matching speed, engine growling. Evelyn swerved onto the dirt track leading toward town, windshield streaked with rain. The pursuing car stayed with her, gaining ground. Then, just as suddenly, it slowed, turned off its lights, and vanished into the dark. She drove the rest of the way in silence, heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. When she reached her motel, she locked the door, drew the curtains, and dumped the wet files onto the bed. The last page had bled from the rain, but a line was still legible. If found, return to County Archives, Project 9A, Containment Site. She whispered the words aloud. Containment Site. The same phrase the badge had guarded for 50 years. The storm outside intensified, wind clawing at the windows. Evelyn stared at the papers, the Polaroid, the rusted badge. Every road was leading to the same place, the water, the bridge, the men sworn to protect the town. And somewhere under that calm, official silence, truth waited, breathing. The rain hadn't stopped by morning. It fell steady and silver, muting the town's edges. Main Street glistened like black glass. The diner's neon sign buzzed weakly through the mist. Ethel's Cafe, since 1957. Detective Evelyn Shaw sat in her booth by the window, coffee gone cold. The stolen files spread before her. Every photo, every note reeked of contradiction. Dates altered, names missing, locations changed. She'd spent half the night memorizing them. Now she waited for Mayor Leon Marston. At 9 sharp, he arrived, gray suit, clean hands, the kind of man who still carried his father's charm like a shield. The waitress greeted him by name. He smiled. That politician's smile, before noticing her. "Detective," he said, his voice honeyed but tight. "You've made quite the stir." Evelyn gestured to the seat across from her. "Sit, I'll save us both some time." He hesitated, then slid into the booth. "If this is about your investigation," "It is." She opened one of the files. "Recognize that signature?" He squinted at the page. July 3rd, 1973. Meeting minutes, River Mill office. H. Cotter, R. Danner, L. Marston. A flicker of something crossed his face before the mask returned. "That was before my time in office." "But not before your time in Coldwater," she said. "You were 23, working under the county engineer. Same department that approved the creek diversion project. The one that conveniently flooded the Danner search area a week after the children disappeared." Marston stirred his coffee slowly. "You've done your homework. I'm not the only one. I have the state lab confirming DNA from that creek matches Michael Danner. His blood was in a county vehicle. You were at that meeting with the sheriff and Roy Danner himself. What were you discussing?" He met her gaze. His eyes were calm but glacial. Infrastructure, roads, drainage. The usual. "You expect me to believe that?" He smiled faintly. "I expect you to prove otherwise." She leaned forward. "You helped hide 2 dead children." The smile faded. "Careful, detective. Allegations like that can end careers. Then tell me what happened." He didn't. Instead, he wiped his mouth neatly with his napkin, placed it on the table, and said quietly, "Some history is heavier than evidence. You dig deep enough, the whole town collapses on you." She stared at him. "Is that a threat?" He slid out of the booth. "It's advice." Then he paused. "You remind me of Cotter. He thought truth mattered more than survival, too." "Where is he?" Evelyn asked. Marston stopped at the door, rain light spilling across his shoes. Where all men like him end up, under what they built. And then he was gone. Evelyn sat back, her pulse hammering. The waitress came over, eyes curious. "Everything all right, hon?" "Fine," Evelyn murmured. "Just ghosts." She folded the file and left a few bills on the table. Outside, rain hammered the pavement. Across the street, a row of county trucks stood parked under a tin awning, their white paint streaked with mud. She crossed over, ignoring the wet. Truck number 6 was gone. At the office, Ortega met her in the hallway, holding a printout. "You won't believe this," he said. "The blood sample from the truck?" The vehicle's record got wiped from the database overnight. Whole entries blank. "Someone pulled it?" "Had to. System shows admin override." She clenched her jaw. "From where?" "Mayor's office terminal," Ortega said. "Timestamp 2:14 a.m. Evelyn swore under her breath. She marched straight to City Hall. The building loomed above the square, 3 stories of sandstone and silence. Inside, the air smelled of paper and lemon polish. A receptionist looked up, startled, as Evelyn strode past. "Mayor Marston isn't—" "I'll find him," she said, pushing open the double doors to the council chamber. Empty. Only the echo of rain on the tall windows and a faint hum from the overhead lights. Then she noticed the door behind the dais ajar. A corridor led down to the archives. Record storage, restricted access. She followed it, her footsteps dull on the concrete floor. The smell changed, paper, dust, and something faintly chemical. Rows of metal cabinets lined the hall, labels faded. Infrastructure, budget, 1970 to 1975. Halfway down, she heard movement, a drawer sliding shut. "Mayor Marston," she called. Silence. She turned the corner. A single light bulb swung overhead. Marston stood at the end of the aisle, back turned, a box open before him. He didn't flinch when she spoke. "You erased the record." He sighed. "You should have left this alone." What was in that box? He turned, something like sadness etched into his face. "Proof, but you wouldn't understand. Try me." He held up a folder, the same kind she'd found at the mill. The label read, Project 9A, Containment Site. Evelyn stepped closer. "That phrase keeps coming up. What is it?" He closed the folder gently. "Something Cotter and Whitlow built together, a place to hide what couldn't be buried. Bodies?" she asked. "Truth," he said softly. "And both amount to the same thing." He moved toward her, the folder tucked under his arm. "You think you want to see what's down there, detective? But you don't. You think you're chasing murder. You're chasing preservation." She blocked his path. "Where is it?" He studied her for a long moment, then said, "North Ridge. Old reservoir tunnel. You'll need a key." He reached into his coat pocket, pulled something small and metallic, a rusted key ring with a county emblem, and dropped it into her palm. "What's there?" she asked again. "Closure," he said. "And you'll wish it wasn't." He brushed past her, heading toward the stairwell. She turned, calling after him, "Why help me?" He paused. "Because I'm tired of being afraid of water every time it rains." Then he was gone. Evelyn looked down at the key. The brass was worn, the teeth blunted. Etched faintly into the metal were 2 letters. C.D. Coldwater Danner. Her phone buzzed. Ortega again. She answered. "Talk. Evelyn, you need to see this. We ran an old fingerprint from the badge you found, and partial latent prints on the badge matched Daniel Shaw." The line went dead. For a long moment, Evelyn couldn't move. The rain outside drummed harder, the sound rising like heartbeat. Her father, Chief Investigator Daniel Shaw, had been the state officer assigned to the Danner case in 1973. She had just inherited his ghosts. She slipped the key into her pocket, her reflection faint in the dark glass of the window. Somewhere beyond that rain, the past waited. Just as buried, just as patient as the dead children who had started all of this. The rain had stopped by the time Evelyn reached the North Ridge, but the world still felt drenched in gray. Mist hung low across the scrub hills, curling around the old chain-link fence that marked the edge of Coldwater's reservoir system. A rusted sign leaned at an angle, half lost in weeds. County property. No entry. She parked the car beside the gate and killed the headlights. The air smelled of iron and wet clay. In the distance, the dried reservoir spread like a shallow wound in the earth, its cracked bed glowing faintly under the rising moon. Evelyn climbed the fence. Her boots sank into soft mud on the other side. The wind stirred, faint and electric, carrying the hush of water that wasn't there anymore. The map from Marston's file led her toward a maintenance access, once used for flood control tunnels. Most had collapsed decades ago. The one she needed, labeled North Intake/Tunnel B3, was supposedly sealed in 1974, just after the Danner case was closed. She found it at the base of a limestone bluff, half hidden behind brush and broken concrete. A steel door stood there, padlocked and rusted. She reached into her coat pocket, pulled out the old brass key. The lock clicked open. Cold air breathed out as she pulled the door inward. Her flashlight beam cut through the dark, catching wet stone and the glint of water seeping from the walls. She stepped inside. The tunnel descended at a steady slope, concrete ribs arching overhead. Her footsteps echoed. The air smelled of algae and age, like something kept secret too long. She moved slowly, the beam dancing across faded stencils on the wall. B3, restricted, county maint. Authorized only. After 50 yards, the passage widened into a small chamber. A rusted pipe crossed the ceiling, dripping into a stagnant pool below. On the far wall, a metal door hung ajar. She pushed it gently. It screeched open, revealing another chamber beyond, smaller, lined with concrete shelves. At first, she thought they were storage racks. Then the beam of her flashlight landed on what rested there. 3 wooden boxes, each stamped with the same code. Project 9A, Containment, Auth, by H.C. Her heart thudded. Harold Cotter again, the sheriff who vanished. She knelt beside the nearest box, brushing away dust. The lid was nailed shut, but the wood had softened with time. Using her knife, she pried it loose. The smell that escaped was old paper, rust, and something faintly metallic. Inside, folders, dozens of them, wrapped in plastic sleeves. She pulled one free. File, Incident Report. June 9, 1973, Danner case classified. The first page was a typed summary, yellowed but legible. At approximately 2200 hours, subject vehicles entered restricted zone at County Reservoir. Unscheduled maintenance being performed under state supervision. 2 juveniles observed near intake structure. Incident resulted in unauthorized access and subsequent loss of life. Per directive, full report sealed under Project 9A. Sheriff Cotter to coordinate narrative. Evelyn's breath hitched. Loss of life. Not murder, an accident, but covered up. She flipped another page. Schematic drawings of the intake system, annotated with red ink. Next to one margin note, bodies unrecovered, diversion necessary before sunrise. Her hand trembled. They hadn't dumped the children. They drowned in a state-run construction zone. And someone in government had decided the truth was too costly. A sound broke the stillness. Metal shifting, faint but close. She froze, turning the light toward the tunnel entrance. Nothing, only darkness. She took a slow step back, the beam sweeping across the shelves. The second box had been opened. She hadn't touched it. The lid leaned against the wall. Inside was something different. A corroded badge like Cotter's, a revolver wrapped in oilcloth, and a photograph tucked beneath. She lifted it. A man in uniform, standing beside a younger officer she recognized instantly. Her father, Daniel Shaw. The back of the photo read, "Inspection visit. June 8, 1973. HCDS." Her pulse pounded in her ears. Her father had been here, the night before the Danner kids vanished. A whisper of movement echoed down the tunnel again, deliberate this time. She swung the light. The reflection of another flashlight flickered once in the distance, then vanished. "Who's there?" she called. Her voice carried, swallowed by damp stone. "This is an active crime scene." No response. She stepped backward toward the wall, heart racing. The air felt thicker now, the tunnel closing in around her. For a moment, she thought she saw a shadow move past the entryway. Then the lights died. Her flashlight blinked once, twice, then went black. Darkness, total and absolute. She listened, water dripping, her own heartbeat, the faint scrape of something metallic moving nearby. Her hand found her service weapon. She held her breath, forcing her voice steady. "Show yourself." Footsteps. Slow, coming closer. Then a voice, low, male, ragged with age. "You shouldn't be here, Evelyn." Her throat went dry. "Who are you?" "You know who I am." The beam of another flashlight flared to life, blinding her. She squinted. The light lowered slowly, revealing a figure, tall, gray-haired, wearing a raincoat dark with water. Her breath caught. "Sheriff Cotter?" He smiled faintly. "Was. A long time ago she aimed her gun. You're supposed to be dead." "Not dead," he said softly. "Buried. Like everything else in this town." "What is this place?" she demanded. "The truth," he said. "The kind no one wanted written." He stepped closer, the beam sliding across the wooden boxes. "You think you found answers, but you've only found the reason they stopped looking. Those children," she said. "You let them die." His jaw tightened. "I didn't let anything happen. I was told to contain it. The intake collapse was never meant to happen. They were playing near the site. One scream, one slip, and they were gone before anyone could reach them. But the papers, the cameras, the state, they needed a villain. So they made one Roy Danner," she whispered. "He was easy to blame. Poor, angry, too drunk to remember his own alibi. You falsified the reports. I followed orders." His voice cracked on the last word. "We buried the truth to save the county. Your father signed off on it." The words hit her like a physical blow. "You're lying." "Am I?" He reached into his coat and pulled a folded page. "Your father wrote this himself." He handed it to her. The paper was brittle, smeared with water. The handwriting was unmistakable, her father's. "Cotter, seal the site. Project 9A, authorization granted, public narrative finalized. I'll take this upstairs." Her hand shook as she read. "He covered it. He protected you," Cotter said quietly. "You were 2 years old. If the truth came out, they would have burned the department to the ground." The silence between them felt endless. Then she said, "Why tell me now?" He looked toward the tunnel mouth, where faint light trembled through mist. "Because the water's gone. Secrets only hold when something's above them." "What's in the third box?" she asked. His expression shifted. Regret. She moved toward it. He didn't stop her. Inside was a small bundle wrapped in fabric. She unrolled it slowly. 2 small shoes, faded red and blue, and a locket with initials engraved inside. MD/CD. Evelyn's eyes burned. She looked up at Cotter, but he was gone. The tunnel stood empty, her flashlight beam trembling across the wet stone. Then, faintly, from deeper inside, came the echo of footsteps fading away. Evelyn didn't sleep that night. Back in her motel room, the tunnel's chill still clung to her skin. Her clothes smelled faintly of damp earth and rust. She sat at the small table with the box of files and the folded note Cotter had given her. Outside, the rain had passed, leaving the air heavy and silent. Somewhere beyond the walls, a freight train moaned across the valley. She unfolded the note again. Her father's handwriting, steady, deliberate, filled the page. She'd seen that same script in birthday cards, grocery lists, the scrawled notes he used to leave on the fridge. Cotter, seal the site. Project 9A. Authorization granted. Public narrative finalized. I'll take this upstairs. She read it over and over, as if repetition might change what it meant. Her father hadn't been a liar. He'd been her moral compass, the one who taught her that the badge meant something sacred. Now that same badge sat on her desk like a wound. At 2 a.m., she called Ortega. He answered groggily. "You okay?" "Not really. I found Cotter. You found— Wait, what?" "He's alive. Or was tonight. He led me to the containment site. I've got files, documents, physical evidence. And something else." "What else?" "A note in my father's handwriting." She paused. "He authorized the cover-up." There was a long silence on the line. Then Ortega said, "You want me to come by?" "No, not yet. I need to understand it before anyone else does." After the call ended, she sat staring at the files spread across the table. One folder was labeled Correspondence, D. Shaw/H. Cotter. Inside were typewritten memos from the State Investigative Division, all redacted, and carbon copies of letters between Cotter and Daniel Shaw. One envelope, yellowed and sealed with tape, had never been opened. Her name was written on it in pencil. Evelyn. Her heart stopped. She opened it carefully, breath shallow. Inside was a single-page letter. June 10th, 1973. Evelyn, if you ever read this, then the truth has finally surfaced. I wanted to tell you while I was still alive, but I was a coward. I believed silence could protect us. I was wrong. The children weren't murdered. They drowned. The reservoir construction wasn't secured. A collapse took them before anyone could reach them. By the time we pulled the intake, it was too late. I tried to report it, but the state buried it to save the contract, and the county followed their lead. I told Cotter to seal the site. I told him to rewrite the report. And when the news broke, they gave the public what it demanded. A monster. Roy Danner. I let them hang him because I believed one man's ruin would keep the town alive. I've lived with that rot ever since. If you go looking, you'll find nothing but bones and regret. Leave it buried, my girl. The truth doesn't free us. It only trades one kind of death for another. Dad. Her hands shook by the time she reached the signature. The paper felt heavier than it should have, soaked with years of guilt pressed into every line. She stared at his handwriting, remembering the man who taught her to shoot, who warned her that good intentions don't survive bureaucracy. He'd carried this truth to his grave, and now it lived with her. She stood and paced the room, the letter still in her hand. The mirror above the dresser reflected a woman she barely recognized. Tired eyes, hair tangled, skin marked by sleepless nights. Her phone buzzed again. A text from Ortega. "Need to show you something. It's about Cotter." She grabbed her coat and drove. The streets of Coldwater were nearly empty, the wet pavement reflecting the orange streetlights. She reached the forensic office just after 3. Ortega waited by the back door, eyes red from exhaustion. He led her inside. The lab lights buzzed faintly. On the table lay a body bag, unzipped halfway. Evelyn's stomach turned. "Who?" "Sheriff Cotter," Ortega said. "Found an hour ago, 5 miles from the reservoir." Single gunshot. Self-inflicted. Her knees went weak. "No." He handed her a small evidence bag. Inside was a folded scrap of paper. "Tell her I'm sorry. Tell her to release the rest." She closed her eyes. "He must have followed you out," Ortega said softly. "Guess he couldn't live with it coming up again." Evelyn turned away, staring through the glass at the gray morning breaking over the hills. Did he leave anything else? Only this. Ortega handed her a key card. County issued, marked Archive, State Records Wing. He had it in his pocket. No match in our system, but the serial number traces to the State Archives in Austin. She took it, her fingers tightening around the plastic. That's where my father worked after Coldwater. Ortega frowned. You think the rest of Project 9A is there? I think he made sure of it. By dawn, Evelyn was back on the road. The rising sun painted the desert in copper and ash. Her father's letter lay on the passenger seat, Cotter's note beside it, both trembling with the motion of the car. She drove east, each mile a deeper cut into the past. In her mind, she could still hear her father's voice. Leave it buried, my girl. But the dead had already spoken, and she couldn't unhear them. The highway into Austin shimmered under the late morning sun, the sky a pale wash of blue. Evelyn Shaw kept her hand steady on the wheel, her father's letter folded in the passenger seat like a heartbeat she couldn't silence. The city rose slowly from the horizon, glass towers where the desert once breathed, the Capitol dome glinting above it all. It felt too clean, too alive, for the kind of truth she carried with her. By the time she reached the state records facility, the air was already thick with heat. The building loomed at the end of a quiet industrial road, featureless concrete, no windows, just a row of steel doors and a single guard booth. She parked, flashed her credentials, and held her breath. The guard checked the card Cotter had left her, squinted, and nodded her through. Inside, the temperature dropped. The hallway hummed with fluorescent light. The air smelled of paper, dust, and something sterile. She found the elevator and descended 3 levels. A plaque on the wall read, Archive Division, Classified Storage, Project Files 1950 to 1980. Evelyn stepped into a maze of shelving units, each stacked high with file boxes labeled in neat government print. The silence was deep, broken only by the hum of ventilation. She found a workstation and logged in using her temporary credentials. The old terminal flickered, its screen green and grainy. She typed, Search Project 9. A. A moment later, the screen blinked. Access restricted. Level 4, clearance required. She exhaled, tapping her fingers against the desk. Then she slid Cotter's keycard into the secondary reader. The terminal paused, scanned, and unlocked. Access granted. A list appeared. Dozens of sub-files, each tagged with red seals, incident reports, engineering schematics, audio transcripts, correspondence, Shaw Danner Cotter. Her throat tightened. Her father's name again. She clicked the first audio file. The speakers crackled with static before a man's voice filled the room. June 9th, 1973. Time, 22:14 hours. Testing underway at North Intake. Visibility low. 2 juveniles entered restricted area. Collapse occurred. Containment protocols engaged. Then another voice, older, strained. We can't report this. You understand what happens if we do, sir, they're children. Then pray the water keeps them. The recording cut off. Evelyn sat frozen, pulse loud in her ears. She recognized that second voice. It was her father's superior at the time, Deputy Director Lawson, head of the state's Environmental Commission. Project 9. A wasn't just a cover-up. It was a government operation. She scrolled through the documents, each one a thread in a web of bureaucracy. Risk assessments, emergency memos, internal communications. Phrases repeated: containment, public narrative, controlled disclosure. At the bottom of the directory sat one final file, dated 1989, the year her father retired. She opened it. A scanned letter appeared, addressed to the governor's office. Per directive, Project 9A to remain sealed indefinitely. All physical evidence transferred to Coldwater County for secured containment. Remaining copies archived under restricted authority. Primary architect D. Shaw deceased. Posthumous classification upheld. She stared at the word architect. Her father hadn't just signed off on the cover-up. He'd built it. Her eyes blurred with the weight of it. Every truth she'd believed about him crumbled like dry clay. Then the lights flickered. Once. Twice. Footsteps echoed at the far end of the corridor. She froze, heart quickening. The sound was measured, heavy. She turned off the monitor, stepping behind the nearest shelf. A security guard rounded the corner, flashlight in hand. "Ma'am? You're not cleared for this level." Evelyn forced a calm tone. "Detective Shaw, Coldwater PD. I was told the files were released." He frowned. "By who?" "Sheriff Cotter." The name hung there. The guard blinked, then chuckled without humor. "That man retired 20 years ago." She didn't respond. "Ma'am, you need to come with me," he said, stepping closer. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. Ortega. She ignored it, taking a slow step backward. "If I walk out of here, these files disappear again, don't they?" "Ma'am." She turned, bolting down the aisle. The guard shouted behind her. Papers whipped from the shelves as she ran, the echo of her boots ricocheting through concrete. At the stairwell, she swiped Cotter's keycard again. The reader blinked red. Denied. She slammed her fist against the door. The guard's footsteps grew louder. Think. She ducked into a side hall, found an emergency exit, and shoved it open. Alarm screamed. The humid blast of outside air hit her like freedom. She sprinted to her car, tires spinning gravel as she tore out of the lot. The siren faded behind her, replaced by the pounding of her heart. Halfway back to the highway, she finally answered Ortega's call. "Evelyn, where the hell are you?" "Austin," she gasped. "I've got files." Proof that Project 9A was a state-run operation. My father, he wasn't covering murder. He was covering negligence. "Then it's bigger than Coldwater," Ortega said. "But listen, you're on the news." "What?" "They're saying you broke into a restricted facility. State's calling for your suspension." Her stomach turned. "They moved fast." "They're scared," Ortega said. "You've got something they can't bury twice." Evelyn gripped the wheel tighter. The highway stretched ahead, endless and empty. In the distance, thunder rolled, the edge of another storm moving across the plains. She pressed harder on the gas. "Then I guess it's time to dig them up myself." Evening light settled over Coldwater like rust in water. The town hadn't changed in 50 years, but something in the air had. An unease you could taste. The stories were moving faster than truth. Local radio murmured from shop windows. Detectives suspended pending inquiry. Breach of state records. Allegations of evidence theft. Evelyn Shaw pulled into town under the cover of dusk. The windshield wipers brushed away the last mist of rain. Her badge sat in the glove box, turned upside down. She parked behind Ruby's Cafe. Through the window, she could see the same crowd of older locals gathered around the counter, faces that had seen too many summers, all watching the news on the small television bolted to the wall. Her own face flashed briefly on the screen. "Unlawful entry. Classified evidence. Under investigation." When she stepped inside, conversation stopped. The hum of the ceiling fan filled the silence. Etta Klein, the same woman who'd reported a scream by the creek in 1973, was behind the counter, hair gone white, but eyes sharp as ever. "You shouldn't be here," she said softly. Evelyn met her gaze. "You said you heard something that night, Mrs. Klein." Something no one believed. Etta's jaw tightened. "I heard children die, Detective. And then I heard this town decide not to." Evelyn took a seat. "Then you know why I'm back." Etta poured a cup of coffee and slid it across. "You think truth's gonna fix what's broken here?" "No," Evelyn said. "But it might stop it from rotting worse." The old woman nodded once, almost sadly. "Then you best talk to the mayor again. He's not been right since you left." Says folks are watching him at night. Says he hears water under the ground. Where is he? Eda's eyes drifted to the window. Across the street, the mayor's office was dark except for one faint lamp in the upper window. Still there. Won't go home. Evelyn finished her coffee and stood. Lock your doors tonight. Outside, the street was nearly empty. The air smelled of sage and rain-soaked dust. She crossed to City Hall, her boots leaving prints in the damp. The front door was unlocked. Inside, the hall lights flickered. The echo of dripping water came from somewhere deep in the building. She followed it up the stairwell to the second floor. The mayor's door was open. Marston sat at his desk, staring at the same folder she'd seen before. Project 9A. His hands were shaking. The lamp cast long shadows across the room, turning him ghost-like. You shouldn't have come back, he said without looking up. You called me, Evelyn said. He gave a dry laugh. Maybe I did. Or maybe I just wanted to see if you'd drown like the rest of us. She stepped closer. They've suspended me. State's moving fast. What did you do? Not me, he whispered. Them. They still have people in Austin. The records don't die. They just change names. He slid a photograph across the desk. This came in the mail yesterday. Evelyn picked it up. It showed a group of men standing at the reservoir site. Cotter, her father, and a younger Marston among them. Behind them, a sign read, Coldwater Intake Project. State and County Joint Development. On the back, someone had scrawled a single line in red ink. It's all still there. Her pulse jumped. The intake tunnel. He nodded slowly. When the reservoir dried last spring, it opened a hole in the south ridge. You've seen one side of it, Detective. There's another chamber. Cotter never told you that part. Why send this to you? He rubbed a trembling hand over his mouth. Because they want me to take the fall this time. It's my turn to be the monster. Then tell me where the entrance is. He looked up finally, eyes glassy with exhaustion. You think digging it up will make your father innocent? I don't care what it makes him. I just want to know what he died protecting Marston. Hesitated, then reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a folded survey map. Here, South Ridge. Look for the old flood vent. But you didn't get it from me. He stood, walked to the window, staring out into the rain. If you go down there, don't go alone. I never do, she said. She left before he could answer. Outside, thunder rolled again, low and steady. The storm was circling back. She climbed into her car and spread the map across the passenger seat. The ridge was marked with survey lines and handwritten notes, one circled in faded pencil. Intake Chamber B. Collapsed. Secondary shaft sealed. As she traced the lines, headlights flared in her rearview mirror. A truck, old, blue, crawling slow up behind her. Her heart clenched. She started the engine and pulled onto the road. The truck followed. At the edge of town, she turned sharply onto the old dirt track leading toward the ridge. The truck stayed close, lights too bright, engine growling like a warning. She reached for her phone. No signal. When she looked back again, the truck was gone. Only the dust it had stirred hung in the air, glowing faintly in her taillights. Evelyn stopped, stepping out into the night. The sound of insects filled the silence, steady and endless. Somewhere out there, the ground was shifting, the reservoir bleeding its secrets back into the open. She folded the map, tucked it into her jacket, and looked toward the dark horizon. Tomorrow, she'd go back to the ridge, and she would find what her father had died to keep buried. The storm had passed by dawn, but the sky still carried its bruises. Purple-gray clouds stretched thin over the desert. Evelyn met Ortega at the edge of the ridge, just past the old intake road. The air smelled of wet limestone and diesel. "You're sure about this?" Ortega asked, tightening his headlamp strap. "Marston's map matches the old survey files," Evelyn said, pulling on gloves. "The second chamber should be about 50 feet down. If it's real, this is where they hid the rest." Or where they buried themselves, Ortega muttered. They followed the dried creek bed to a slope of fractured rock. The flood vent was half collapsed, an oval mouth choked with brush and rusted rebar. Water still glistened deep inside, catching the dawn light like a blade. Evelyn crouched, brushing dirt away from the concrete lip. Looks like it caved from the inside. Ortega knelt beside her. State must have sealed it after the first investigation. No, she said softly. My father did. They rigged ropes to the nearest boulder, clipped in, and began the descent. The shaft was narrow, cold, the air thick with the scent of rust and algae. Their lights caught fragments of old machinery, broken pumps, twisted steel beams, the bones of forgotten work. 20 feet down, the tunnel opened into a slanted corridor. Water pooled at their boots. Faded hazard signs peeled from the walls. Danger. Hydraulic gate maintenance. Keep clear. Evelyn's light passed over a symbol she hadn't seen before. 3 concentric rings carved into the wall, like ripples in stone. What is that? Ortega asked. An old reclamation mark, she said. Used for sealed operations. It means containment complete. They moved deeper. The corridor angled left, then dropped again into a cavern wide enough to swallow a house. The air grew colder. Their beams swept across the space, and both stopped breathing. Half buried in the silt, tilted on its side, was a vehicle. Not a car this time. A maintenance truck, paint long peeled to gray, the state emblem barely visible on its door. Evelyn's voice came out thin. Model matches 1973 fleet. County Engineering, your father's department, Ortega said. They waded closer. Inside the cab, 2 helmets lay on the seats, still caked with mud. One had a name etched faintly across the brim, D. Shaw. Evelyn reached through the shattered window, fingertips brushing rust. He was here. Behind the truck, the chamber wall was pitted and scarred. It looked like someone had tried to blast through but never finished. In the far corner, a wooden crate sat half submerged, its lid rotted away. Evelyn pried it open. Inside were yellowed folders sealed in plastic. The top one bore the stamp, Project 9A, Final Disposition. She opened it. The first page was a typewritten report dated August 17, 1973. Incident occurred at South Intake following equipment failure during floodgate test. 2 miners entered restricted zone. Cause unknown. Bodies unrecovered. State directive issued to classify incident under environmental collapse, not human error. Containment ordered. Another sheet followed. A handwritten note. Her father's script shaky but clear. They said we could save the town if we buried the truth. Lawson promised it would die with the desert, but I hear the water every night. I think it remembers. Evelyn's throat tightened. He didn't do this to protect himself, she said. He was trying to keep everyone else from seeing what really happened. Ortega flipped through the rest. There's an addendum from 1981. Reclassification request. Denied. He tried to reopen it. She looked at the helmets again, at the silent truck. And when they wouldn't let him, he came back down here. To die with it, Ortega said quietly. They were silent for a moment. The only sound was dripping water. Then Evelyn noticed something glinting behind the truck. She waded over and knelt. A rusted steel door was half buried in the wall, its surface carved with those same ripple rings. She brushed away silt until she found a handle. Ortega frowned. We're not going in there. We've got what we need. She didn't answer. She pulled. The door resisted, groaned, then swung inward. Cold air rushed out, dry, ancient. Her flashlight beam swept inside. The chamber beyond was smaller, circular, lined with stone instead of concrete. At the center sat a single wooden bench, half rotted. And on it, something wrapped in oilcloth. She stepped closer, unwrapping it carefully. Inside lay a small pair of shoes. Children's, scuffed, faded, the leather hardened with time. Between them, a silver pendant shaped like a dove. Ortega's breath caught. Jesus, she whispered. Eli and Marin Foster, the siblings who vanished on the wall above the bench. Someone had carved a message into the stone, letters uneven but deliberate. They fell. We lied. Forgive us. Evelyn closed her eyes. The chamber seemed to breathe around her, heavy with the weight of years. She took out her recorder. Her voice was low, steady. Site confirmed. Secondary containment chamber, South Ridge. Artifacts recovered consistent with missing foster children. 1973 disappearance. Evidence of intentional concealment by state personnel and county officials. Then she lowered the recorder and looked at Ortega. We finish this now. He nodded. You think the state will let this go public? They won't have a choice. She gathered the artifacts, sealed them in evidence bags, and turned to leave. At the tunnel entrance, a sound echoed faintly above, the rumble of an engine. Then the crack of distant thunder. Ortega stiffened. We're not alone. Evelyn killed her light. The tunnel dimmed to blue shadows. The engine noise grew louder, closer. Someone was sealing the entrance. She whispered, Move. They ran, boots splashing through water, hearts pounding in sync with the roar overhead. Dust fell from the ceiling. A slab of concrete crashed behind them, sealing off the chamber they'd just left. By the time they reached the surface, the vent was already half covered in debris. The truck they'd driven was gone. Evelyn dropped to her knees, breathing hard. The ridge was empty except for tire tracks vanishing toward the horizon. Ortega looked at her. They know we found it. She nodded slowly. Good. Now they'll have to admit it exists. Thunder rolled again, distant but closing in. By nightfall, the storm had returned. Wind swept across the ridge in long, ragged howls, flattening the grass and bending the trees toward the earth. Lightning cracked over the desert like a camera flash, exposing for a heartbeat everything that wanted to stay hidden. Evelyn drove straight to the sheriff's office. The evidence bag sat on the passenger seat, the shoes, the pendant, the letter from her father. Proof that the town's entire history was built on silence. When she pulled up, the street was empty. Only one car sat outside. Marston's. Its headlights still on, the driver's door ajar, rain pooling in the seat. Inside, the building was dark except for the faint glow of a desk lamp in Cotter's old office. She stepped in quietly. Water dripped from her coat onto the tile. Marston was there, sitting at Cotter's desk, a bottle half drained beside him. His tie was gone, his shirt soaked through. In his trembling hand, he held an old photograph, the same one he'd shown her before, of the men standing by the reservoir. He looked up slowly when he heard her. You found it, didn't you? I did, Evelyn said. The second chamber. The Foster kids. He nodded, eyes glassy. I knew you would. That's why they came for me first. Thought I'd stop you. They tried to seal the ridge, she said. Someone knew we were there. Marston gave a hollow laugh. Someone always knows. This town was never about truth, Detective. It was about survival. She set the evidence bags on the desk, the pendant catching the light. Survival's what you tell yourself when you're afraid to say murder. Murder? He blinked. No one killed those children. She froze. What did you just say? He leaned forward, elbows on the desk, voice low. They fell, just like the report said. That summer, the floodgates jammed open after a storm. They were playing near the intake, slipped in before anyone could reach them. The water took them. Evelyn's pulse raced. Then why cover it up? Why bury the truth for 50 years? Because this town was dying, he said, staring past her. The state promised us funding, a new dam, jobs. 2 dead kids would have shut it all down. Cotter, your father, the engineers. They chose silence so Coldwater could live. and maybe they saved it. But they damned themselves doing it. She stared at him, rain hammering the windows. You helped them. I was 27, he whispered. Fresh out of university, working in records. Cotter brought me the reports and said to refile them under environmental loss. I didn't argue. No one did. He reached for the pendant, turning it between his fingers. I see their faces every night. The intake took them, and we buried that failure with a lie. Then tell the truth now, Evelyn said. You still can. Marston smiled faintly, tired, almost peaceful. Truth doesn't set people free, Detective. It just changes who's in the cage. He reached into the drawer and pulled out a revolver. Old Black Cotter's model. Evelyn's body went cold. Don't, she said softly. You don't have to carry their guilt anymore. It's not theirs I carry, he murmured. It's mine. The gun trembled in his hand. If you release this, the town burns. Every family tied to the project loses everything. Coldwater disappears. Maybe it should. Evelyn took a slow step forward. You owe them more than that. Eli and Marin deserve to be found. That's all this ever was. Marston's gaze lifted to hers. Watery, fractured light in his eyes. Then find them a place to rest. He turned the revolver downward, not toward her, not even toward himself, but toward the desk. He fired once. The bullet hit the bottle, glass exploding into shards. The echo filled the office. He let the gun drop. Take it. Take all of it. Just don't come back here. Evelyn exhaled shakily, the scent of gunpowder heavy in the air. She gathered the evidence bags, tucked the pendant safely inside her coat. Goodbye, Mayor. He didn't answer. He just stared at the rain, whispering something she couldn't hear. Outside, Ortega's headlights cut through the downpour. She climbed in beside him. You got what you needed? He asked. She nodded. Enough to end it. They drove through the storm toward the broadcast tower on the hill, the only place left with a working generator and a direct line to the state network. The wipers fought against sheets of rain, thunder following them like an angry heart. At the tower, Evelyn uploaded the files, the audio recordings, the letters, the recovered artifacts. Each one blinked green as it sent, transmitting to half a dozen independent news desks. When it was done, she sat back and closed her eyes. There. It's out. Ortega watched her, rain dripping from his hair. What happens now? Now, she said quietly, they can't bury it again. They drove back through town at dawn. The rain had stopped, leaving everything washed raw. People stood on porches, radios pressed to their ears, listening to the story unfold. Coldwater tragedy. Reclassified after 5 decades. Evidence of government suppression found. At the edge of town, Evelyn stopped the car. The horizon was bleeding orange. Funny thing, Ortega said. The desert never forgets. It just waits for rain. She smiled faintly. So do ghosts. They sat in silence, watching the sun break over the ridge. Behind them, Coldwater was finally waking, not from sleep, but from denial. Months passed before the desert turned green again. Coldwater bloomed late that spring, brittle grass along the gullies, purple wildflowers rising from ground that had forgotten softness. The reservoir, half full once more, lay still as glass under a clean white sky. The headlines had burned hot, then faded. The world always moved on. But here, the echoes lingered. Reporters stopped coming. Tourists who'd heard the story snapped their pictures by the sight of the 1973 Coldwater incident sign, then drove away. The wind took what they left behind: paper cups, footprints, silence. Evelyn Shaw stayed. Her suspension was lifted quietly. The state called her a whistleblower. Others called her reckless. It didn't matter. She rented a small house outside town, near the edge of the basin, and every morning she walked the ridge where the intake once roared. Some days Ortega joined her, 2 paper cups of coffee in hand. He talked about transfers, about leaving the force, but he never did. They put the foster kids next to their parents, he told her one morning when the air was cool and sweet. Simple markers, no cameras, just family. Evelyn nodded, eyes on the horizon. Good. At the memorial, 2 stones stood side by side, pale as bone. A small silver dove rested between them, the same pendant she'd pulled from the second chamber. Beneath it, an inscription, Eli and Marin Foster, 1962 to 1973. The desert remembers. She knelt, tracing the words with her thumb. The soil smelled faintly of sage and rain. Her father's name wasn't far away. They'd reclassified his death. Not a coward's silence anymore, but an act of protection. A man who tried to undo what others demanded he forget. She placed a photograph there. 2 children standing on the edge of a dusty lake, the sky endless behind them. One smiling, one shielding her eyes from the sun. She didn't know who'd taken it, only that it belonged here. When she rose, Ortega was watching her. You ever gonna stop looking? Evelyn thought about it, then shook her head. Truth doesn't stop existing just because people stop asking. He smiled faintly. Then I guess you'll never run out of work. They walked back toward the car. The town shimmered in the heat below. The same streets, the same faces, but something subtle had changed. Windows left open again. Children's laughter near the schoolyard. A community lighter by some invisible weight. That night, Evelyn uploaded the final report. No narration, no dramatization, just facts. The recovered evidence, the confessions, the truth of what Coldwater had buried. The video began with footage of the basin after the storm, the cracked ground glistening with shallow water. Her voice, calm, unhurried. In 1973, 2 children vanished. Their names were Eli and Marin Foster. For 50 years, their story was a secret kept by a town and a state afraid of its own reflection. The truth was never about monsters. It was about people, ordinary, frightened, flawed. The kind who lie to survive and pray the desert stays silent. But deserts don't forget. They only wait for rain. The video ended on the dove pendant resting between the graves. Text faded in over it. For Eli and Marin. For those still missing. For the ones who keep digging. It went live at midnight. By morning, it had reached millions. Evelyn didn't check the views. She left her phone on the table and stepped outside. The sky was vast and clear. A wind moved through the brush, carrying the scent of rain. She closed her eyes and listened to the soft hiss of the reservoir, to the far-off hum of thunder rolling beyond the hills. It no longer sounded like accusation. It sounded like release. The desert, at last, was breathing again.